大家好，我是一诺。今天我们的直播是我和一位非常特别的嘉宾的对谈。他的名字呢叫 Venkatesh Narayanamurti，然后 short for Venky。我给大家讲一下他的介绍，大家知道为什么今天的这个直播特别值得期待哈。他自己是美国国家工程院院士、艺术与科学院院士。是著名的物理学家，在固体电子学研究和科技创新政策研究领域都有非常高的造诣。他自己的经历呢，他是印度人，然后在22岁的时候从印度到了美国，然后在Cornell 读的这个博士，然后他从那个Cornell 毕业之后是去了非常非常著名的贝尔实验室，在那儿一做就做了20年，从研究员开始一直做到主任。之后呢，他去了Sandia的这个 National Lab，就是国家的实验室。然后之后呢，他是建立了这个 UC Santa Barbara 的工程学院。然后在98年呢，他又被邀请去哈佛，开始呢新建哈佛的这个 School of Engineering 工程院。然后一直到了2008年，他在这个期间呢，也做了这个首任的文理学院里面的物理学院的院长，就是这个 liberal arts 里面讲物理的哈，实际上是把工程和这个文理有结合。然后包括他在09年到15年这6年的时间，又去做了肯尼迪学院里面的这个科学技术和公共政策项目的主任。所以大家看得出来哈，他是一个科学家出身啊，是个物理学家。然后呢，在这个贝尔实验室做这个一个算是用英文讲叫 legendary 哈，一个传奇性的这样的一个研究组织里面做领导。那之后呢，又建立了顶尖大学里面的工程学院，然后又从工程呢希望能够把这个文理学院还有这个政策制定放在一起。然后他这一生其实都致力于推动这个科学和技术以及整个这个文化和政策环境的这样的一个构建，所以非常非常难得。那他这本书是在这个80岁高龄的时候写的。他2016年呢是写了第一本书关于创新的这个 cycle 哈，这个算是一个叫做什么体系和系统吧。然后呢，他的这本新书2024年今年5月份在中国上市，叫做《科技革命的本源》啊，也是有机会今天我们对谈的这本书。那他今年已经85岁了啊，然后在这个对谈的过程中，大家也会感受得到哈，非常非常的有能量，然后思维非常非常的敏捷和敏锐。然后呢，他也根据这本书，讲了讲他为什么写这本书，他看到的一些现在从科学到科技这些领域里面的一些组织形式上的一些问题，以及他的自己的思考和一些建议。那在这个直播里呢，我也问了他关于对年轻人有什么建议哈，关于去美国的中国留学生有什么建议，包括他如何做到在85岁的高龄还这么样的精力充沛。我这些问题都有问，希望大家也能在这个直播里面，像我一样有所收获。Hi, Vinky, thank you so much for joining us. It's pretty late on the east coast of the U.S. Thank you for
Yes,
making time.
it's okay. Thank you. And it's early in the morning for you, 8:30 in the
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, not too bad. Wonderful. So I actually have the Chinese version of your book. I don't know if you have seen it. But this is it's been published and has been highly recommended by a lot of
Yeah.
highly respected scientists, engineers, and of course innovation institution leaders in China. So I'm excited to have this conversation with you. First of all, Vinky, what motivated you to write this book? Because you, if I if I did my math right, you're 85 now, right? And when the book came out, you were already over 80 years old. And what motivated you to put your thoughts into a book like this?
About after I stepped down as dean at the Harvard School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, I on a sabbatical went to Harvard Kennedy School and directed the Science, Technology, and Public Policy program. So I started teaching policy as well, and then I was reading all of Vannevar Bush's papers on science, the endless frontier, and I realized everything was about science and engineering and technology were missing. There were 150 references to science, and while many things in World War was a lot about was engineering. So I said, there's something wrong. It really, science is not the endless frontier. It's research which is the endless frontier. And we must rethink that. And I wrote a book in 2016, which is also translated in Chinese, in
Yeah,
Tsinghua.
cycles of innovation. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So cycles are so that was more a descriptive thing, and we kept thinking more deeply about it. And I started a collaboration with another person, Jeff Sau, where I was also beginning to teach a lot. So I really understood how science policy works. And my colleague, who was previously was a research scientist, he also was interested. I'd known him for many years. Because I used to be vice president of Sandia, and he kept recording me, talking to me, and then finally we said the missing piece are two, that science and technology are nouns. You think of them, science is some book in physics or chemistry or whatever, and technology is some cell phone, computer, etc., etc. And however, when you do research, science and technology are not the same. They are they change with time, and it's more in English we'd call a verb. So science and technology, first of all, are dynamic, and second, in science, one always said science is about facts and and explanations, without ever telling you exactly how the facts, as if they were outside of science. But of course, facts actually came from technology because you observe them in some fashion, telescope, microscope, integrated circuit, materials, etc. And so it was clear that we must bring these two together. When I wrote the book Cycles, the first book, it was clear in Bell Labs where I worked, we never separated research into basic or applied. It was always research. Research is about the unknown. It can be about science, it can be about technology, it is about the world. So that is a very important discussion. So it's not the science, it's the research is the underlying, and research is a combination of science and technology.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
second,
Oh,
so
yeah, go
so
ahead.
so technology yeah, actually feel sometimes the technology is invented long before it is understood, and the science comes afterwards. Or you create the technology and you discover something new, and then the science comes. So science is more in service of technology than the other way around. So this elevation of science over technology was wrong. You need both. It's like saying if you have children, there's only need man or woman. You need both. And that really is that kind of a thing. They are married, and we should never say one is better than the other. Research is
Yeah,
the unknown, it is about surprise. So it is
yeah,
dynamic, they're verbs, and they interact with each other. And sometimes the science follows the technology, sometimes the technology follows the science. When you understand it, then you can further, you want to improve it, and so on. So
hmm,
there's no such thing as applied research. It's research. It can be engineering, it could be technology, it could be science, it could be physics, chemistry. That's all research. It's not you don't you don't have a hierarchy. Very
yeah.
important. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. No, I find it revealing when I was reading it myself. I got my PhD in molecular biology myself, and then I didn't really go on to the science or the research track. But you're right, that was a clear, almost a hierarchy that, there's basic research, there's basic research and applied research. And then there's almost the basic one is more higher in terms of status. And there's a
yeah.
pipeline that feeds into the applied side, which I think that's what
In
you're
the
trying
Bell
to.
Lab framework, everybody is the same. Every research, you don't raise one to the other. It's like
Yeah,
saying mathematics is obviously very good. Mathematics is also a tool. It's a technology to explain things. So you just
yeah,
want to get rid of those distinctions. And biology, your field, is much closer to engineering. Only nature made the engineered systems, and engineering made them with artificial ways.
yeah, yeah.
Engineering has a lot to learn from biology, and biology has a lot to learn from engineering.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And then I for our audience, you have a very unique and of course highly achieved career because you mentioned biolab for our audience. I just want to kind of fill that in. Venki was in biolab from 1968 to 1987 for
yeah,
20 years, and that's a legendary institution. And you were there starting from a researcher all the way to director. And then you
yeah,
moved on to National Labs, and then you went on to Sandia Lab, and then you built actually the engineering school of Harvard after you were at UC Santa Barbara. So it was an impressive span of experience from industry or corporate research institutions to national labs to universities. I think it's based on this massive and expansive experience, you were putting out this book. And then the book title in English has this word called technoscientific revolution. What do you mean by technoscientific?
It was purposely done that way. It's showing the unity of tech science and technology. They're interrelated. So that's why it's called technoscientific, because it's the combination. So that we have, uh, when Jeff Sau visited me over 5 years, it took 4 years for us to write the book because, and when COVID came, we both were home and we could spend a lot of time actually writing the book. And before that, he came to my office and we were talking about how to describe it. And then we realized we drew this diagram. They feed on each other. It is dynamic. It is a verb. It's not a noun. And they feed on each other and join together. And that's the way to think of it. So engineering, the scientific method and an engineering method. When you design a tool, it is what form and what function do you want to perform. When you want to do science, you want to say what is the result, what is the fact, what is the explanation, and one feeds the other, and then when you learn some more, then you improve the technology. So it's a cycle. It's a cycle, and so this work of Jeff Sau and myself put what I did, Tolu and I did earlier with cycle, put it more on a theoretical foundation, so to speak.
Yeah, I have this chart. I think for people who are interested in this book, of course, you can find the book in the link below, but this is the chart in the introduction. And then you have also another one, I think later on, with another layer you call culture.
So this is
right?
what we mean. Yes. So that by the nature of research, which we're talking about, it is this understanding of how science and technology is. That's only one. Second, a lot of people, famous British philosopher Popper, talked about basically you have a hypothesis and you test the hypothesis. That is only half the problem. The question really is you want to find a new hypothesis, you want to find a new question, and so it's an energy that people don't often think about. That's what really brings new qualities. So asking the right questions is more important than just succeed the hypothesis. That's not understood often. Bell Labs was always asking, what is the question you want to study? What is the important question? It's not a hypothesis. It is to discovery. It is to create. It's to do something new.
Yeah.
Am I being clear? Am I being clear?
Yeah. Yes. You're basically saying finding questions are fundamentally different from finding answers.
It's a different mindset. And science might have done a lot of things with explanations, but when you if you're a contrarian, you say, well, everything doesn't quite fit right. Then you discover something new. You discover a new question. How to explain that? And that's what discovery and inventions lead to discoveries. That's why it's a cycle, because you built a tool and you found something unexpected. That happens often. So when in physics, we recently in high energy physics, they discovered the Higgs boson. That was kind of confirming. It was not really a discovery. It was just that we verified Higgs boson. But if they'd seen something different, then it would have been really break high energy physics. Am I being clear? So to finding a new question and discovering something new is really, and that was the essence of Bell Labs. That's why it was so famous. They always ask you knew what is it you're going to do.
And then,
clear?
Yeah, very clear. So I wonder, I think you actually went into in your book as well. So if we are clear, it's more important to find questions, or at least equally clear in finding questions than finding answers. Then how are these two processes managed differently? I think that's what made Bell Lab successful, right?
Yes. One of the things which I want to say, even though I respect business schools and big corporations I worked, management is never the right word. The leader is important. The leader there are many features. You see that triangles you showed in the first example. There's the nature of research, and then there is the governance structure. So below the governance structure, what it tells you, right below, is you do not manage the research. What you do, you give your leader, such as the person who in Tsinghua, who's now president of one of the universities, Kikan Zui, my friend, science. He is given a block funding, and nobody tells individually what you're doing. In Bell Labs, the director, and I was director after a while, he has funds. And there's a laboratory, and the researchers don't apply for grants. They are judged on what are the new things they did. When we hire them and we give them, so they don't have to worry about writing for grants and writing proposals, projects, etc. It's very important to have that. So the researcher, to find something surprising, must be given freedom to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Long term, you will judge that person. If in 10 years nothing came out, then you have to worry about it. But usually you think of, you want to solve long term problems. There are short term problems, which is different. It's a project, you must finish it at a certain time. But for research, it has to be long term. Very small
Mm.
number, but must be long term, because otherwise you can never ask for new questions.
Yeah, yeah. That's very powerful because this one, of course, they translate it into 培育 in Chinese, but in
Yeah,
English it's nurturing. So which
yeah.
is almost, if you see I guess if
So
you use analogy of farming, this is the root, right? This is
right.
below the
And nurture means, I wrote many articles on nurturing. It is, your job is to not to manage them, but you're to nurture them. So the individual is like your students and your children. You give them the support and all those features. Sometimes you have to tell them what to do, but not, or usually they learn. And so you want to give them all the resources. Don't have to worry about the bureaucracy, don't have to worry about grants and all these things. And they only must do good research and look for something new. When they're hired, first question. So there are a whole bunch of issues there which are very important and not understood by a lot of people throughout the world. This is not a problem of China or in USA or whatever. This is a problem. People don't understand. You cannot spend a lot of money because it is a luxury. But for the best institutions, that has to be the way. That's what I meant. You had, issues that you fund people, not projects. So when I have the flexibility and somebody who understands, that doesn't mean it is you are perfect. I made lots of mistakes, but usually you'll find it's the person you try to find. Is this person achieving? Has he or she got fire in the belly, and will they really advance the world? It's a judgment call. That doesn't mean it's right always. Bell Labs made mistakes in choosing its people, but then
yeah,
there was a performance review. But they were given an awful lot of freedom. They all
yeah,
knew that they must impact the communications business. Communication is a huge thing. There are all kinds of things happen in communication, and computing also is huge. So that's a big problem space. And
yeah,
how is the future going to be? That's how transistor was invented. Today it is AI, of course. And even some of the early work in AI was done at Bell Labs. People don't know that Hopfield, who won the prize, he did a lot of his work at Bell Labs. He was a professor at Caltech, but he would come every summer, and he used to be at Bell Labs before, then went to Caltech. So AI has its fundamental roots from Bell Labs. That's how great Bell Labs was. And this is
Mm.
30 years after he was at Bell Labs, 20 years.
I see. Well, I
Yeah.
see. Well,
Yeah.
I want to go back to the point you mentioned. I think it's very profound because you talked about, management sometimes is a wrong word because people make
Uh,
it into
yeah.
almost
Yeah.
a way of disciplining people. And you talk about something very fundamental in
Yeah.
terms of patience, in terms of giving them sufficient resources and patience. But that's also the hardest, especially I think for our China audience, we would know like the country is managed by KPIs, right? So if you don't get something out by a certain time, you get reviewed every few months. I'm sure in the US there's that culture as well.
Yeah, oh
So
yeah. Now it's very narrow because some government agency wants to fund it. You got to write reports and do all these
right,
things. The people,
exactly.
my scientists never had to write reports to me. I knew what they were doing. I was always there. I was working for them. They were not working for me. I was working for them.
That's why you were saying leader, which is basically you're serving them
Yeah.
instead
And then
of
you give,
managing them.
and then you give them a vision, of course. And
Yeah.
sometimes you very gently suggest, look, you might want to work with somebody, such and such a person. And they just do it. You just do it, and you have conversations. You go meet them in the lab. You don't order them. You don't tell them go do this. You just start discussing like two people will discuss. Oh, then it'll strike you all the time. I was always walking around.
Yeah, yeah. But
That
one
is
thing
what you go and see your children and all those. It's just like they are like your you nurture them. You're a parent. You're a parent.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't be on you like over their shoulder all the time.
And you always want to meet people where they work. There's
Mm,
time for a formal meeting sometimes, but when there's an issue of discipline or something else, which of course you still have, but usually you just go wherever they're doing. And then if they do something exciting, they want to come and tell you, and you want to go straight to the lab, then they know you care about them. Am I being
Mm.
so Bell Lab
Mm-hmm.
leaders were always available when the scientists discovered something new because it was exciting for everybody. We could all drink a glass of beer and be happy. So this is a attitude. It's a culture. Culture is more important than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
All about people. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
to select the people with great care. We never had recruiting done by personnel officers. Not to say personnel officers are important, there's still some rules, but it was always done by, when I was laboratory director, I was a Cornell graduate. I used to go all the time, every year, twice, to meet people in the physics department, electrical engineering, and others, and find out who the best students were. I'd follow them for years, and then I'd keep an eye on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have
Mm.
to know the field. You cannot just turn it to a personnel officer if you don't know the field. So I would go to conferences with them. I would also keep my research going. That's not just true for me, for all of us. That was the culture.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to pick up on the point you mentioned around people over project, because usually, of course, when you decide to fund something, it's based on your grant, it's based on what you plan to do. But I think you're in the book, once and once again mentioned that it's more important on the people. But what's your view on how do you find and manage the people? Like, what's your lesson yourself going back all those decades in finding the right people?
That's what the thing is, you have to be very actively involved in recruiting from where the students are coming. We used to always hire people just after their PhD from universities. And we
Mm-hmm.
had I went to Cornell, and eventually, after a few years, when I'd done some research, they thought I was a good person. I went as part of a recruiting team, and then I
Mm.
became head of the recruiting team. It would be five or six, eight people because we did research in physics, applied physics, chemistry, material science, electrical engineering. So we'd have people going to all of those different departments and talking to the professors, and then we would
Mm.
meet with students sometimes 2, 3 years before they got their PhD, and then we'd follow their progress, and then we would know. You had to you had to know the professor well, because some professors are very modest. They will undersell their student. Some professors are this, they will oversell. You have to calibrate it and get a feeling, this person did fantastic things in the lab, and then you bring them together. So you get the very best that way. And
Mm.
if the professors did not make good recommendations to me, I wouldn't go back to them. So they knew.
Mm.
And they knew Bell Labs was a very good place. This was a tradition long before me. Bell Labs was already 50 years in existence after I went there. So
Mm.
but that was a tradition. So the
Yeah.
recruitment was done by leading scientists and going to universities and seeing the professors and the students and taking the time. We'd go and visit those campuses twice a year, meet the students and meet the professors individually. I'd spend the morning meeting with professors in their individual offices, see their schedule, and then set up some afternoon schedule to meet with the students.
I see. Hey, I'm
Mhm.
curious, what are the qualities that click for you? And you must have a good radar
Yes.
of reading the
And I
guests.
would follow up. Some students I knew were promising. I'd keep touching from them from my office every few months how they're doing, and they knew I was interested in them. That's how all
Mm.
these came. And others did that too. That was a culture at Bell Labs. We had
Mm.
recruits for Stanford, for Harvard, MIT, Caltech, you can name it.
Yeah. But
That
what
was
are the qualities that you're looking for in those people? Like, what are the top three things? If you see the three in those students or in this engineers that think, okay, I want to go cultivate him or recruit him. What are the things that stood out for you?
good. So, when I got recruited myself, I had a university offer. And then this Bell Labs recruiter came. Somebody at Cornell told them that I'm a good student. And he said, "Will you come and visit Bell Labs?" So I went and visited. And as soon as I went there, it was such an exciting place. I never thought I'd be going to, I had never heard of Bell Labs until then. And I turned down my university offer and went there. I actually went to my professor. I said, "Let's have a call." The thing was, one of the things already by the time I went there, in a university, you had to apply for grants. You had to go and get it. It's not always easy. and you had to go on. The paperwork was enormous. So it's not a good way of doing research. I actually think the US system is very good mainly because we train very good students. The students are the product for universities more than the research. It is the knowledge that they do. And the Bell Labs was our product was really the research. You see the difference? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
university's main role has to be teaching students that learn how to do research, of course. And sometimes they discover that universities, of course, who win big prizes too. But that is not the main purpose. The main
Mm,
purpose is still education,
mm,
the
mm-hmm.
PhD level.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I guess what I
That's a
was,
distinction. That's an important distinction because as a professor, the university teaching takes significant effort, and you're training these young people who learn a lot of mistakes. The graduate students take 3, 4 years before they actually succeed. I don't know why I'm getting. I'm sorry. Yeah, good. I'm sorry.
are you okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, excellent. I guess what I was trying to get to, because I'm sure lots of young people are listening to this talk, so they must be interested in your eyes. What are the qualities in the young people you are looking for? Like, if you're say, go to a university and see a
Yeah.
lot of bright students, like do you look at their papers? Like what stood out as qualities in them that make you want to recruit them to your institution?
So for me, even when I was taking my own students, even grades and all were not important to me. Grades are valuable. They tell you that you basically know physics, chemistry, whatever. But what is the research they want to do? If they said they wanted to do just continue what they did for their thesis, that was a red flag. They said they want to do something different. Look for, and the question I would ask them, I'm going to give you an empty lab. I'll give you lots of money, whatever you want to do your research. What are you going to do? And the answer to that question would determine whether that student will, and along with the recommendations.
Hmm.
So their curiosity, their thinking differently outside the box. So you have to get to know them personally. So what we would do, those who look promising after my interview, I'd write a report and circulate it to all the other departments at Bell Labs, which were doing research. And they would all say, some would say they have an opening and they would like to hire. And then I would invite the student to come and spend 2 days at Bell Labs. They would give a thesis review where they'll talk about what research they had done, and then will come the interesting question: what is it new you're going to do? And you get an empty lab, and what are you going to do? That was became quite important. Then whether the people would then again want them. If they didn't think from the talk that this person had fire in the belly, you know what that means? You're so energetic, you really want to do something new, then we hire them. If they seem like slightly just plodders, they'll do a good job, but they won't break new ground. We just wouldn't hire them.
Mm-hmm.
This was the research department because we're looking for really creative people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Thank you.
yeah,
Sorry,
so
you
that
want.
it's a get experience. You learn this because you see you do it. It's a cultural thing. And after the person has given the talk first thing in the morning, you always knew, is this person going to do great or not in terms of, because what would happen then, the department chairs, we'd have somebody take the candidate out of the room, and then they will discuss. And those who wanted to see would be sometimes the person didn't do well. Nobody would want to see them. You're left embarrassing. You got this person, you got to take them around, and or everybody wants to meet with this person. You see, that's how it
Yeah.
works. And then
Yeah.
in two-way, because that person would have offer possibility to join 2 or 3 different departments. So and the person will be told, I'll tell the candidate, you got 2, 3 departments that are interested in you. He or she will select the department they want to be in, and vice versa. So it's a
Yeah.
match.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank
It
you.
is, it is
And
very personally done. It is not done by, I would always have some human resources person, you still important, but they
mhm.
are not doing the recruiting. The recruiting
Yeah.
are people who are technically good. And that's very important. Too often from in the bureaucracies, there are people who don't do research. We were all active. The leaders were active in research. They were going to conferences and meetings. They knew what the important excitement was. We never just stayed in our office. You were
Yeah.
also going to be attending conferences, etc., because you must be alive with the most important things.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So I guess, if I when I was reading the book, I felt the same. I think you were playing actually multiple roles in those institutions. First of all, of course, you are a researcher yourself, but you're also playing a role of a people leader and also a team builder,
Yeah,
right? And during this whole process, you're, fundamentally an educator because what,
right.
the
Okay.
principles you talk about is very fundamental to education as well.
Right, of course. But education never stops, really. You need a
Yeah.
postdoctoral and others because, in fact, that's the whole idea of research. You want to keep doing something new. You always encourage people to doing something new every 5 to 7 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that,
Yeah. Right, right. And let's go back to the book and yourself. It's interesting because you moved on after 20 years in Bell Lab, right? And then to National Labs, and then also later on to build engineering school in Harvard. What propelled you to do that? Bell Lab seems to be a great place in making things happen.
when I originally went to Bell Labs, I said, well, I'll go for 5 years, make my name, and I'll just go to university. But the place was working was so well, and there was such good support. They asked me to be a first department manager, and then they made me a lab director, and it was really a very nice place. And so I would get calls from universities to get higher positions, but I would turn them down. And then as AT&T was broken up in 1984, and things started to change. Bell Labs, as it is, doesn't exist anymore because
Mm,
because the government decided it was too big. We must separate the manufacturing from the research and from the communications company and created all these extra companies. But that was good for the profit makers, but was no good for long-term research because you couldn't
mm,
support, because research is still expensive. When you're giving this freedom, even though it's a small percentage of the corporation's money, it still is real money. Okay. So I could see that handwriting, but for a long time, Bell Labs was, Ma Bell had an idealistic public service mission. They always wanted to, it was known as Ma Bell, sort of mother who takes care of everybody. And
mm,
and it was kind of historical. And when the government wanted help, they would always do it. And so when after nuclear weapons were invented and after World War II at Los Alamos, they decided they want to have laboratories. And because it's a dangerous business, they had the Los Alamos laboratory run by University of California, and then Sandia was doing the engineering part, and President Truman wrote to the chairman of Western Electric and said, we would like AT&T and Bell Labs to manage this because of your reputation, because we want the most excellent people to come there, because people don't want to work in the nuclear business, they want to do research in other things. So the AT&T agreed to do this under the following conditions. We won't take any money for it, but we will send the top managers of that laboratory from Bell Laboratories, the president, the vice president for research, the attorney, and a couple of other people. And you will reimburse us for the cost of their salary, but no other profit. It's a public service, and we were supposed to just serve the country. And so for 60 years, ATA Bell Labs ran Sandia National Laboratories. And
mm,
after the breakup, it no longer, we were no longer a big company which could afford to do all these things. And so you need scale. This is very important. People realize uh, small companies are very important, but you also need the big companies. Like
mm,
China has Baidu and quite a few. And it's quite important because you need the scale, because after a while, small things will take to a big manufacturing and big things. So you need all of those. So people don't realize Bell Labs research was only 10% of Bell Labs. 90% of Bell Labs was all kinds of development organizations. And then that
mm,
manufacturing arm. So people
yeah,
don't, it was not a, so research was just a very small part, but we were always connected. We always knew long term. It is called user
yeah,
advice. And then AT&T, the leaders of Bell Labs asked me if I'd go as vice president of Sandia. I thought it'd be a nice thing to try. It was actually very nice that I went there, and I learned a lot, not just about communications, but it's a big lab. I learned a lot about how big engineered systems are made and other things, and to do research. And the idea was to do the research, which might be quite important, just like you have uh, things which you have well, for cryptography and all these things are important. So it was research. But I knew long term AT&T would not manage it because they just broken up. I went there just a couple of years after, and the Bell Labs continued for a few more years, but after that you could not. I could see the handwriting in the wall. So it
Hmm.
happened that people at Santa Barbara were looking for a Dane, and they called me, and that was now 25 years I'd been. I said, this is the time to go because
I see.
the government broke up AT&T. I'm still very sorry about it because that's caused even issues with China and other places because we lost our manufacturing. We don't make telecommunications equipment. It's coming from
Anymore.
all
Yeah.
over. It's really I don't. I believe you need scale.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting. I think if you look, I'm sure you know you lived through those times with Bell Labs, also Xerox PARC, RCA, and all those organizations that
Yeah.
really propelled
Oh yeah.
the innovation that we see today in the US.
One thing really nice about America, which is what took me, people are allowed to explore things. They are not put into a rigid boundary, and that is the culture. And so Bell Labs epitomized that culture, and they were doing partly because of the long-term future of communications. They want to be at the head, and also because there was such excitement. RCA, or General Electric. It was a wonderful culture. It needs to be real, and that's really because we do not separate basic and applied research. You need a
Yeah,
motivation. Even a physics person who wants to advance, he or she is motivated to advance physics. There's no such thing. You need that some kind of anchor.
right,
I'm saying,
right.
if
Yeah.
you're Einstein, maybe not, but most people, you need that. Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then I also, if today it's still on the Harvard website how you started the Harvard Engineering School, and then it's actually, of course, Harvard is a big name, but it wasn't known for engineering. Like, so when you
I,
were recruited to run that, how did that start?
that was, you know, uh, actually long before physics became my field is actually physics, that there was a Lawrence Scientific School way back in 1880. And then eventually Harvard didn't know what to do with things like engineering. So it kept going a little bit. And there are people who left Harvard and created MIT because somehow anything which was technical, they thought was applied. And that's not,
Right.
gentlemen don't do that. You are the real thinkers. There's the British view, and so there was a period where MIT, and there was always some little engineering because a donor had given money to engineering. You had to respect that. So it continued in an odd way, and it had a checkered history. And then in 1990s, when the first computers were built at Harvard, but they gave away computer science. They didn't do computer science for a while because they were bright people and so on. They had physics and chemistry and math, and so from the physics it was done. And then Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer studied at Harvard. Bill Gates didn't finish, and Microsoft became one of the biggest companies, one of the most successful. They came out of the then division of applied sciences, and and the president went to visit Gates because they look he's a rich man. You can give, and they said Harvard has had theoretical physicists running what little there is of applied science. You ought to get somebody from the outside who understands both science and technology, and bring them. So the president sent the dean of the faculty interviewing various people, and he came to visit me. I was dean at Santa Barbara, and I said, I'm not looking for a job, but I'm happy to advise you how you want to do it. And a few months later, he calls me, can you come and visit for it? I said, I'm not looking. I said, no, just come and meet the president. They, I never applied, and suddenly I got a job offer. And then, so because they were serious, they had made a mistake because in fact, I told them that Harvard will always get a grade of incomplete because they may have good science departments if they didn't have a parallel engineering school. And it'll be
Yeah, that was 1998, right?
that I went there. And it took
Yeah.
me 97 years to get people to agree that it should be made into a full school. So it became a full
Wow.
school only in 2007. Okay, almost 9 years. It was approved in 2006 or so, and then by the time it was a year before. And now it's really grown the enrollments and everything else because computer science, I hired 20 faculty. There were like four when I came to Harvard.
Wow.
And
Wow.
now there are like 40. So, and there are more students in computer science, but more importantly, the undergraduates begin to respect technology. Technology
Mm,
is not inferior to science. They're both important. That's the
mm,
message. And it's now very different culture. And of course, AI
yeah.
is a good example here. And we had lots of successful alumni who never graduated, besides Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, who created Facebook and
Look.
Meta. Yeah, he was a junior student when he left Harvard. He was when I was dean,
Oh, I see.
2004. So
I see.
so I went to Harvard for two reasons. Santa Barbara was better in my field, actually. Material Santa Barbara, second to none. I went for two reasons. One, it was a private school, so there's much less bureaucracy.
Mm,
That I know. I've been enough with Sandia was a bureaucracy because we had to deal with the government. Okay, government's always, they're spending public funds. And the other, we got very good graduate students in Santa Barbara. The undergraduates are okay, but as a public university, we had to take more, up to 10%. But
mm,
Harvard undergraduates were the cream of the country, sometimes of the world. So I knew the undergraduates were very bright, and we must make them respect computer science, engineering, technology. And I said,
mm.
we'll have a new breed of engineering, so-called Renaissance engineers, who not only will know how the world works, know how things work, but also how the world works. They'll learn the social skills as well as technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any recollection of Mark Zuckerberg when he was a student?
Just very little, Then
Yeah.
I did meet with him, and now, of course, he's given a lot of, he's now a big shot. He probably won't talk to me anymore. He won't remember me.
But I love it when you said it's not only does not only know how things work, but how the world works. I
Well,
think that's very powerful. And then is that part of the reason behind your advisory role in the Kennedy School in Harvard
and
for
that's part
policy?
of the thing. And I wanted to change the policy makers. Vannevar Bush was a great person. He wrote that thing in 1945, but he didn't, and he knew engineering. But because science was viewed by the British and all that, and because the atom bomb came out, it got way too much publicity. And it's kind of
Mm.
interesting. Two of this year's Nobel Prize in Physics and Chemistry, all went to AI people.
Right.
I So anyway, so
Yeah.
times are changing. That doesn't mean there'll be some new things in physics. I'll never say bad things about physics, but it's not the only discipline. It advances.
Right.
That's where,
Right.
because also another thing, Bell Labs never worried whether you're a physicist or electrical engineering. You got the best people, and they just worked. They knew both physics, they knew both engineering, and there was no boundary, especially in materials. It's always physics, chemistry, engineering, biology, all of them together. So too often stovepipe. This is true everywhere, all over the world, including China, everywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Narrow, very narrow
Absolutely.
disciplines.
Yeah.
It's changing, but it's not easy because
Yeah.
people want to control. They don't want to think of the bigger picture.
Right, right. I want to go back to one point that you mentioned earlier. I think it's very profound. You talk about innovation takes scale. So you need a bigger labs. And of course, that's one. On the other hand, you also mentioned innovation takes freedom, right? You have to have a trust and freedom and then very little bureaucracy. So you almost see two systems. So for example, if you think about Soviet, okay, they're the best in scale, right? So like they have, I mean, part of China is similar to that. There's a national system, there's resources, there's big scale. But on the other hand, in terms of the freedom, the trust you mentioned, that's usually lacking in a rigid system like that. In the US, of course, the culture is a liberal democracy. That's part of the nature, but the scale is a challenge. So how do you see these two kind of, work
It's
together?
hard. People don't understand that. Bell Labs had both scale along with manufacturing, but they created the research this thing department in a very special way. It was not funded by every unit, but it was funded by a tax by the chairman of AT&T, of the
Mm,
operating company. So it was like an overhead, okay? Very important. So, and the vice president of research had full funding for this. Of course, every year he had to go to Harvard to get, but then that was it. And he had to manage and give me money, come an empty lab. I had no budget, but whatever I wanted, I got, okay? So they were uh, organizationally separated from the development departments. There were there were many development departments. There was systems, there was components and others. So those three or four developers had their own vice presidents, but they were funded directly by the business units. That means they had to develop special projects at the present time. But this part was funded centrally. So the corporate lab, at the same time, they had the industrial culture of going and doing things, not just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
cultural thing, very important cultural thing. At the same time, because the one was separated, you were not responsible for the short-term work. Somebody you might
Mm-hmm.
advise them. Of course, you're working for the same company because you were judged what new things you did, what you published, how you were recognized by your peers, etc. We gave away by even by law all our patents and all, including the
Yeah.
transistor, which never made money. I think not everything has to be tied to money because there's a whole issue of public goods. There are a whole lot of issues in today's world. Today's world is true everywhere, worldwide, China, US, everywhere. So, but every great country has to have a small thing for those who are just like artists and pianists and musicians. Some of them just they're unusual people. So
Yeah.
AT&T were really people who were interested in some grand problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was no solid state physics before Bell Labs became so important. That whole field of physics now is the biggest branch of physics, condensed matter materials physics,
Mm-hmm.
because uh, because of transistor, which then led to communications, computers, and today's AI. Even though a lot of it is
Yeah,
software,
it has roots there. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they invented the laser, they invented CC charge coupled devices, which are there in every phone, etc., etc. Yeah,
Yeah. But I think the reason I raised this question is that, now Bell Lab is gone, right? It's history. It's not there anymore. So like and I think that's what you're talking about, like the manufacturing are gone from the US, that was part of
yeah.
the issue leading to
I,
today's
I do think
challenge.
very important for physics and engineering to have strong manufacturing. There's nothing to do with the competition with China. Every country must have it. It just
Right.
it is important. It's all the manufacturing cannot be done because you need those right nearby, and sometimes there is wars and so on. So this is true for every country.
Right.
This is people don't understand that because very often people will get the manufacturing do cheaply somewhere else because they don't think it's important. The economy,
Mm-hmm.
any other, but that's wrong. Innovation requires all of them.
You need an ecosystem.
You need an ecosystem, and you do need the entrepreneurs when a big corporation comes there, the development department become quite bureaucratic too, because just like that's the way it works.
Right.
That's why you need some people who will just break China, and so you got to encourage that. But ultimately, they need scale. You take AI, you need enormous computing power. A small company can't do it. Even
Yeah.
Harvard cannot do it.
Yeah.
You need Google or Microsoft. You need Baidu, or ByteDance. They're big companies.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I have a hypothetical question to you. So is and you have, of course, this. I mean, the priceless experience, valuable experience yourself. That's basically by 20 years in Bell Lab, and then the 10 years and 10 years and building, national labs and then universities, departments. So if you were given the chance of rebuilding a system today, what would that look like?
Oh, it certainly would look like, uh, first of all, a different mechanism for funding. That is,
Mm,
people who really understand must be in charge. They're not perfect, but because they will make mistakes, but you must work hard to find the right. Labs had a whole system of who would become directors. When the researchers are just hiring, and some people should never go beyond doing their research because they're not very good with people, but they're very good in their physics. This is true. This is true even in arts and humanities. It's true, so on. And so you were given a small promotion, maybe made the head of a small group, and then you will know if you can actually handle people. And out of that subset will be the directors who get the kind of bigger responsibility. So you have to have a whole set. So if you go to create a lab, it has to be an environment which are grand challenge problems. It may be that there's really important ones in human health with cancer, whatever, and then you have the right leader in place, give him or her block funding, and they're still connected with some corporation. I believe it is better run by a corporation than by government
Mm.
because they intrinsically are more efficient. They
Mhm.
know and they're not so bureaucratic, even the biggest corporations, because they want to get going. The bureaucrats are always standing in the way. This is true everywhere, worldwide. I just don't know the difference. Sometimes China is better, sometimes China not. And so I firmly believe corporate labs have still a big place in good places, the old way. And so we got rid of that because people only want to say, what profit did you make? We didn't, Bell Labs never made any money out of the transistor. It's such a big thing, or laser. So that's a issue. That's a big issue. That's a big issue. So somebody has to say a small percentage is going to be for this longer term work. It can be the government even supporting it, but then just like Sandia, when Sandia was managed by AT&T, I got a big block funding from Department of Energy. But they didn't say every manager. I decided how it is to be funded to have to satisfy Sandia's mission. But that's not
Mhm.
anymore. Now some program manager in Washington decides and gives all little money.
Mm.
And
Mm.
they're far removed from the workers. You have to know the workers. You have to meet the people where they work. You can't be sitting some bureaucrat sitting in an office. That's not how innovation happens.
Mhm.
Am I being
Mhm.
clear? So there will be those kind of governance rules are so important. My colleague Jeff Sau is actually working on actually trying to see because we must recreate it in some fashion. America would not be a great country without that. It'll be true. Others have to decide for themselves. You have to know China's culture is different, British culture is different, American culture is I'm now after I've been here 60 years. I'm basically very American, even though I'm originally from India. So I think it has to adapt to each culture. So it's not exactly the same, but I think there's some principles which will be the same. And
Yeah.
who runs it? There is efficient. Bell Labs ran efficiently. There was very little bureaucracy. There were just small staffs to support it. It is not bureaucratic. They they were there to make easy your work. So if we had safety, we had staff who would exactly make it safe, and that's it. Didn't tell the staff you have to take 10 courses on safety and wasting your time.
Yeah.
I'm being clear. So, and that doesn't mean the staff are important, but they have got a different purpose. Excellent support so the work of the scientist gets going. It's a cultural
Yeah.
truth. It's so important. If you read my book in Cycles, there is a chapter on Genelia Farm, which is a biology, and it tells you that person understood what I'm talking about. That is,
Mhm.
move the bureaucracy. That doesn't mean you still follow certain rules. You still have to have safety and all those, but you don't burden the researcher with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say bureaucracy is a low level of management.
Yes, yeah,
'Cause-
yeah. But the
right, you need to
bureaucracy,
go beyond it.
the management is more important than the work.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
in
And the
industrial
management
labs,
itself
the
becomes the
work,
work.
yes, yes. As long as you do good work, you're appreciated. That really is important. That's
Right, right, right. Because it's
otherwise,
harder to give people freedom than to control people. It's easy to control, especially when you control the check. But actually, a higher level of management is trusting and empowering, and that has a much higher call on the manager, on the leader,
one
which
thing,
is
when I
difficult.
first came to Harvard, I had that luxury because they knew I had to build something new. And both
Hmm.
the dean of the faculty and the president gave me a lot. They trusted me. And I knew when to call them and seek their advice if I was going to go beyond normal Harvard policy. So that's very
Mm,
building. So I had that trust and I earned that trust too because I knew when to consult them.
yeah.
It is a talent. I cannot say it's, sometimes, but those are all important elements. So, but they supported me because they knew Harvard was weak in engineering. It needs to succeed.
Right, right. Yeah. So Venki, I have two last questions.
Yes.
Number one, both of them is related to yourself, because I think I was very curious about your life journey. I think my readers would be too. One is that you went to the States in 1965. You were 26, right? So you got your,
Hold it. I went to the States when I was 21 in
oh,
1961. In 1961.
1961. Oh, the 1965 is when you went to Cornell.
No, 1965 is when I got my PhD.
Oh, here you go. Okay, 1920, 61. Sorry, you're 22 around that time, right? And then so you got your master's and your a bachelor's and master's in physics and then went to the States. And that was really early. I was curious In 1961, were there a lot of Indian immigrants in the US?
Very small number. There were a few, but not many. Not like today. Now,
Yeah,
many more. I would say the largest student population in science and engineering is China and India.
right.
China one and India second.
Yeah, but they
That's
came much later. So I was very
Yeah,
curious in
China
19,
came much later. China came much later, of course. In
right.
fact, I was involved in the early days after the Cultural Revolution in the 80s when Deng Xiaoping then was the prime minister.
Yeah.
And I, lots of older Chinese came and studied, and I was head of the China program of the American Physical Society.
Oh, you were. You were the head of the China program.
Yeah, because they needed mentoring. China was in that time recovering from. You know
Yeah,
better. Your
chaos.
parents would know. You're probably too young for that. Yeah,
I know
so
that. I know. I read history. Yeah, it was very chaotic in China. So it was so interesting because your generation was basically a generation ahead of the Chinese. Because in the 1960s, there was basically practically no Chinese who went as a graduate student in physics.
in
Very
19,
few.
1961, when I came, I was so excited when I came to America because the first transistor radios made by Sony and an American company was available. Two, three transistors. We had big vacuum tubes in our father's house. They would always burn out and so on. And it was a
Yeah,
big, and Kennedy was the president, just got elected president.
that's
And then,
right. Yeah,
then he wanted to go to the moon.
the
And,
moon. Exactly. Yeah.
and that was exciting for somebody like me.
Right, right, right. So I'm sorry, I'm dating you because that was over half a century ago. And then I wonder, do you have any advice? Because lots of people now, Chinese, are still hoping to go to the States, especially in science and engineering. Any advice for them? Like when you freshly arrived back then, what are some of the experiences you've had, or what are some of the lessons you've learned that can help new aspiring students?
Oh, I think obviously in those days you couldn't take much money out of India. I had almost no money, like $50 or something between my wife and myself, and uh, Harvard Cornell gave me a fellowship, and so the first month they gave me early so I had money, and that's how I managed. And you had to learn a lot to live very frugally, but it was
Mm,
okay. We didn't mind it, We and I always feel while in Rome, do like the Romans do. That is,
mm,
if I'm in Beijing, I must be like people from Beijing. If I'm in US, and very important to become part of the community. I had luckily a very good thesis advisor. I've got together with all my fellow students and postdocs, and we'd meet. So sometimes foreign students get isolated. This includes Chinese students because they brought. It's the most important thing is try to interact and be part of the local community there. That is,
mhm.
research group and all the others. A little bit depends on the professor too, but that's very important. And you learn from your peers. So don't only have Chinese friends. Have an Indian friend, have a American friend, have all. That's my biggest advice. So I've been
Yeah,
well integrated because I had lots of American friends. They were not all Indian friends. Sometimes they do that happens with Orientals. There's both Chinese and Indians. They will not mix around. So that's my big
right.
advice. It's quite important.
Yeah,
Why else are you coming?
exactly. You can stay in India or in China.
Right, right. So that is a very important. And the other, you always respect. I've had many Chinese students too. Of course. And Ji Wai Cheng was student too for a while. The person
Yeah,
who that
who translated your book. Yeah,
right? And they're all, and I'm quite close to them as well as my American and Indian students. And it really is quite important that they need to be lucky with their advisor too. So choosing your advisor, uh, the match should be good. There are
yeah,
many advisors. Most advisors can be good and caring, but occasionally they aren't. Some people can be very tough. So
yeah,
it depends on the personality. So exploring that or finding and interacting with peers, that means your fellow students will have an idea, maybe who've been there 1 year earlier. So really be part of the community, not just the Chinese community, not just the Indian community.
yeah. Thank you. And because as you said, you mentioned you have a lot of Chinese students yourselves. Like any differences you noticed between the Chinese and the Indian? Because this is probably two largest groups. And any advice for the Chinese students from your standpoint?
Chinese was they are somewhat very reverential. That I noticed. I used to review uh, students at University of Hong Kong. I was on the advisory board for their undergraduate program. Very bright students, and but the examinations were always like memories. That's true in India too. US, it is not like that. You're given to think what the answer might be. So it's that curiosity. And so there is a difference in the how, and I think that's very important. In there, the Western culture, US was very good because you gave the student to make them think and not just have a memory thing of the thing. So you try to solve. So that's a very important distinction, which very often I find also because we revere the professor much more senior. In US, I'd call my professor with my first name. I keep telling Charles, you just have to call me Venki. He still calls me Dr. Venki. So anyway, but at least that's okay. I tell them, okay, you call me Professor Venki, but it's informal. You see what I'm saying? This is true. So,
Yeah.
uh, where you're almost like peer, and in both India and China, and throughout Asia, there's some good things of Asia, of course, and is sometimes we are over uh, don't show enough independence.
Sorry, what's that?
Don't show enough independence. That is
Don't show
ability to
enough independence. Mm.
independence. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
So,
interesting. I want to
yeah,
add here because I had recently had an interview with Indra Nooyi. You probably know her. So she's the
yes,
PepsiCo CEO, a
yeah.
brilliant Indian woman.
I don't know her, but I know of her. Yeah,
Yeah, so I asked her the same question, and then she mentioned this very interesting detail. She said she has a lot of course, Chinese employees in her team as well. She said, compared to the Indians, many Chinese cannot give a firm handshake. They're very shy,
yeah. They're very
um,
kind. Yeah. And,
right?
and the other thing where Indians had an advantage, I went to an English speaking school from kindergarten, and
Mm-hmm.
and because of British rule, a lot of Indians could speak very good English.
Mm.
That is an issue, and I think it's
Right.
a problem that I think it's quite important. Whether you like the British or not, let's face it, English has now become the common language for a lot of science. So it's
Yeah.
quite, there's nothing against China or India. Even in India, they want everybody to do it in Hindi because there's nationalism, and Chinese will want it in China. But I think learning English is a very important element because that's the way it is. All the books are there and so on.
Yeah.
And this is a problem even for India and some other countries, right? But
Mm.
India, at least a lot of people speak English because of history, because
Yeah.
Britain ruled over India for so. That's true for Hong Kong. When you go to Hong
Right.
Kong, it's very different from the rest of China because English is very common there.
Right, right. But I think language is only one thing. I think your education, I read in your bio, you were on the debate team yourself, even when you were in
Yeah.
India.
So I
And you
went
were
to
a
the
runner. Yeah, so
yeah.
there are many things in that kind of made you other than English itself,
I
right?
did go that's why I went to Harvard because I wanted this broader education. I always said we not only know how things over the world works, you do want socially. This will be very important for many countries and even for US. How we train our and so that's the social interactions is what I meant. Don't stick only to your community. Your own community is important, but you must broaden. Otherwise, you might as well just study only in China.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
Thank
in
you so
India.
much. And then my last question is really out of my own curiosity because I was very impressed, of course, inspired by your productivity and energy at this age. And then you put out two books, and both are very heavy lifting books. So you have to be very agile mentally. You must be very healthy physically, and you're 85 now, right? So what are some of the things you do to stay healthy and productive and energetic?
Always, you have certain roots. You must always be read and so on. So that kind of is work is everything for me. Never, that's the Bell Labs culture is achieving. And I'm lucky. You all want to always have a good family. My wife and I married for 62 years. Got met in college and told parents we go to America, and that's it. We got married and came. And it was
You're a
21.
lucky man.
So I had very good family support too. That's important to work at this rate. And so
Mm,
having a good family structure is still obviously always important. And I always like to run and keep fit. So I actually did have an accident and almost had trouble this a year ago because I was running 3 miles and I fainted and so on. We won't go into that detail at age 84, but it's quite important to be Physics keeps you. And I, I, I want to still write another book or two because it's interesting. I want to work on AI and how to build the greatest AI laboratory
Mm.
because there's a lot to be learned from Bell Labs and other places, and that's forgotten, and that's so important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even reading this book make me like reminiscent of those days. I was like, that's a remarkable organization, like built 100 years ago.
So I actually still get agitated a little bit because I'm an agent of change. I want America to be successful, just like you want China to be. That's perfectly okay. But then you got to have, and there are people who can go older, always keep and have a good family and do exercises.
Yeah.
And
Do you run today? Like,
and
still,
and,
still,
and my wife is a wonderful chef in the sense very healthy food, and Chinese food is usually healthy, but sometimes not, right? That's a minor thing. It really is being interested in your work and also being socially connected and doing
Mm,
some people, so and each person is different. You're different, I'm different. All Chinese are not the same, all Indians are not the same, and that's what humanity is. Each person is unique.
yeah. So
That's
I
why
heard you.
that's why it is about people. Each person is unique, and you can't rule them by. You must understand that person. That's the biggest rule of management, leadership.
Mm,
To get to know the people, and then that's okay. If uh, President Xi works with certain people, that's fine. You must have people who you, and same with President Biden or Trump or anybody or me. You still have to find because not all. That's okay. That's okay. You must find your yeah, but you must always look for people who will complement you though. You don't want all
mm,
yes men. You want people who will complement you and add to it. So even when I was uh, director of labs, you always try to build a group, not identical, but how they may interface with each other. So the whole things which go to build a effective school. So I would build people where there is healthy competition. It's like sibling rivalry. Like your brothers and sisters love each other, but they also compete, and that's to build a family. So you have to build a research family by complementary skills and having critical
yeah.
mass. Building that is what takes talent. Not everybody understands it. That's how the next Bell Labs will. I'm convinced such next Bell Labs will happen because that is
Mm,
that model. No such thing as basic research. No such thing as applied research. It's research. It is about the unknown, finding something new, what is surprising.
yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the biggest message for everybody. Don't have a hierarchy. Physics is not better than engineering. Engineering is not better than physics. They have their roles, and there's creativity in all of those disciplines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You may be
Yeah.
you may be good in math, but you'll be terrible in even putting anything together. Why are you giving the person who's good in math as all the credit? That's not right. Because there's
Yeah.
creativity also. It's a very broad-minded view which you need to have
Yeah, yeah,
to
that's
build a great.
excellent. So I just want to add one last, from me. This is the book of Venki's by in Chinese. Chinese name is called《科技革命的本源：如何培育卓越研究与创新》. It's an excellent book. I think, and thank you so much for your time. Because what I heard, once and again, of course, we covered such a broad range of topics, from the nature of technoscientific
Yeah,
revolution, your role in management and leadership, and then your life advices. I think what you're really doing through your career, if I may, is that because of your training in physics, I think you can see a lot of things at a very essence level. So kind of beyond the superficial level. And then if you look at the essence and then lots of the divide, right? So the science, the basic versus the applied, or the Chinese versus the India, they're inconsequential. They're very
right,
superficial. Look beyond and get to the essence. And once you see the essence, you see the paradigm change that's needed. It's basically, I think you're calling for a new paradigm of
right,
organizing research and of leadership as well, and also seeing people beyond projects. And then those
right.
are new paradigms that's being called out in this book. And then that's really I think that's the call I heard from your book
Yes,
and from
that's
your,
correct. That is the call, and we've got to now operationalize to create a new Bell Labs. I will always be advising people on that. That's how I convinced President Summers. It was not easy to create a school because I said Harvard must start working at least engineering like Bell Labs did, and he
yeah,
supported me. after a lot of discussion, he did support me. And he's not an
Yeah,
easy man to convince. He was the president when the school was formed.
nice. If there were another Bell Lab, what would you name it?
Right. No. So, I don't know. Look, right now, we're working like a Bell Labs 2.0 or Bell Labs 3.0. But many corporate labs were successful. They were slightly different. It was because there were no boundaries. You were just
Mm,
trying to solve important problems and look for something new to advance the technology. And when you
mm,
advance technology, you do new science, always, because you
mm-hmm.
discover. You think you're going to discover one thing, you find something else. That's the nature of research, to look
Yeah.
unexpected. So in our book with Jeff Shaw, we said the Bell Labs had a whole bunch of what are called informed contrarians. That that is, they knew the subject, but they knew there was something wrong with that subject. Something had
Informed contrarians. What's the name?
contrarian. That is, they knew the subject, and the contrary to most of the thought. People think peer review is perfect. Peer review is not perfect. Science is always evolving. Research is always evolving. Otherwise, it'll dead. We say everything is invented. It's not
Yeah.
so. So
Yeah.
there's always somebody who's a contrarian, and you look for that.
Informed contrarian. Yeah, I love that word.
That's the message of the book: the importance of the informed contrarian. And so, if everybody agrees with you, that's not exciting.
Right, right. Exactly. That's that's not exciting. And then you're actually heading to somewhere very dangerous.
That is how revolutions happen.
It's true.
That's why, and it's technoscientific. Science and technology are like this. In Bell Labs, we
Mm,
valued both the science and the technology. And if there was something important in science, we would let them do the science. Horst Stormer was a member of my group, did fractional quantum Hall effect, one of the biggest discoveries in physics. So, and he started his job was to make better transistors. And from that, he went to quantum Hall effect.
yeah.
That's what Bell Labs was about. So that's
Absolutely.
very flexible. I think Professor Kikun Zhe, who wrote one of he's a very famous Chinese scientist. He understands this.
Yeah. You mean Professor Xue Qikun, 是吗? Is that Xue
Yeah.
Qikun who wrote the preface for your book? Is that the one you're mentioning? Yeah,
I've
yeah,
got
yeah.
to
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
log off now. Time soon to go to bed. Okay. Nice talking to you. Bye bye.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.